There's a pattern in currency collapse that has destroyed three major civilizations in the last 2,000 years. And right now in 2025, the United States is following that exact same pattern, stage by stage, decision by decision. Almost like we're reading from a monetary playbook written in the ruins of dead empires. In 180 AD, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean world. Their currency, the denarius, was accepted from Britain to Egypt. It was 95% pure silver. Within 90 years, the empire collapsed into chaos. The denarius was worthless copper, and Rome never recovered its former power. In 1914, Germany was the most advanced industrial nation in Europe. The German mark was backed by gold, trusted internationally, and represented one of the strongest economies on earth. Within 9 years, Germans were using wheelbarrows full of marks to buy a loaf of bread, and the entire social order had disintegrated into extremism that would consume the world. In 1980, Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa, prosperous, stable, self-sufficient. The Zimbabwean dollar was worth more than the US dollar. Within 28 years, they were printing $100 trillion bills that couldn't buy a bus ticket, and the currency was officially abandoned. 3 times, 3 civilizations, 3 currencies, all following the exact same 7-stage sequence. And here's what should terrify you. The United States has already completed 5 of the 7 stages. We're not approaching currency collapse. We're deep inside it. This is the story of how currencies die, why governments always make the same decisions, and why the math says the dollar is next. And it's happening faster than anyone in power will admit. Before we go through the pattern, you need to understand what currency debasement actually is. Not inflation, not monetary policy. Debasement is when a government deliberately destroys the value of its own currency to pay debts it cannot otherwise afford. In ancient times, this meant physically reducing the precious metal content in coins. A silver coin that was supposed to be 95% pure gets minted at 90%, then 80%, then 50%. The government declares it's worth the same amount, but everyone knows it's not. Prices rise. People hoard old coins. The economy breaks. In modern times, it's digital. You don't reduce silver content. You just print more currency. Trillions appear on balance sheets. The government says it's necessary, temporary, responsible monetary policy. But the mechanism is identical. More currency units chasing the same amount of goods. The value of each unit falls, and once it starts, it never stops. Because the only thing worse than debasing your currency is admitting you're bankrupt. And here's the key. Currency debasement follows a predictable 7-stage sequence every single time. The stages are identical whether you're talking about ancient Rome, Weimar Germany, or modern Zimbabwe. The technology changes, the rhetoric changes, but the pattern is mathematical, and math doesn't care about your excuses. Let me show you how it actually played out. 3 times, 3 civilizations, 3 identical paths to collapse. Let's start with the template for all currency collapse. Rome, 180 to 280 AD. In 180 AD, when Emperor Marcus Aurelius died, Rome was the most powerful civilization on Earth. Their currency, the denarius, had been stable for over 200 years. It was a silver coin, originally minted at 95% purity. Soldiers were paid in denarii. Taxes were collected in denarii. Trade across the empire was conducted in denarii. But Marcus Aurelius left his son Commodus a problem. The empire was stretched thin. Military expenses were constant. Barbarian tribes pressed the borders, and the treasury was running deficits. This is stage 1 of every currency collapse. Initial crisis requiring funding beyond normal revenues. Rome faced constant wars on multiple frontiers. The Parthian Empire to the east, Germanic tribes to the north, Rebellions within. Every emperor needed to pay legions across thousands of miles of territory. Tax revenue wasn't enough, and Rome, like every empire before and since, refused to cut spending. So they made the decision that begins every currency death. They debased the coinage. Stage 2. Deliberate reduction of currency value. In 194 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus reduced the silver content of the denarius from 85% to 50%. That's not a gradual drift. That's a deliberate policy decision. Mix more copper into the silver, mint the same number of coins, declare they're worth the same amount, and pay soldiers with debased currency. At first it worked. The soldiers got their pay, the government funded its wars, and most people didn't immediately notice because silver coins don't come stamped with purity percentages. But merchants noticed. They started testing coins, biting them, weighing them, and when they realized the new coins had less silver, they adjusted prices accordingly. Stage 3. Inflation begins as population recognizes debasement. By 200 AD, prices across the Roman Empire were rising noticeably. A measure of wheat that cost 6 denarii now cost 10, not because wheat was scarce, because the denarii were worth less. People who'd saved coins for retirement found their savings worth half as much. Soldiers discovered their pay couldn't buy what it used to, and the government, instead of stopping, accelerated. Because here's what every government learns. Once you start debasing, you can't stop. If you stop printing debased currency, you can't pay your bills. You'd have to cut spending massively, fire soldiers, end programs, admit bankruptcy. So you keep going, and this is where it becomes irreversible. Stage 4. Acceleration of debasement as government becomes dependent on it. Emperor Caracalla, ruling from 211 to 217, reduced the denarius to 40% silver. Emperor Gordian III, in 238, reduced it to 35%. By 260, under Emperor Gallienus, the denarius was less than 5% silver. It was copper with a silver wash, so thin it wore off in circulation. Do the math. In 80 years, the denarius went from 85% silver to 5% silver. That's not monetary policy, that's systematic destruction of the currency, and prices exploded accordingly. A Roman pound of gold that traded for 50,000 denarii in 200 AD required 2 million denarii by 260 AD. That's 40 times inflation in 60 years. But the government kept insisting the coins were worth face value. They passed price control laws making it illegal to charge more than official prices. Merchants who raised prices faced execution. This is what failing governments always do. They blame merchants. They blame speculators. They blame anyone except themselves. Stage 5. Hyperinflation and loss of public confidence. By 270 AD, Romans stopped using denarii for major transactions. They demanded payment in old coins, full-weight silver, or increasingly in gold. The official currency was being abandoned by the population. Soldiers refused their pay in debased denarii. They demanded payment in goods, land, or real silver. Tax collectors couldn't collect taxes in worthless coins, so they started demanding payment in grain, livestock, anything tangible. The economy was reverting to barter in the most advanced civilization on Earth because nobody trusted the currency anymore. And this created a death spiral. The government needed more revenue, but they couldn't collect it in denarii because nobody would accept denarii. So they printed more denarii, which made them even more worthless, which made people trust them even less. Stage 6. Currency collapse and economic breakdown. By 280 AD, the denarius was functionally worthless. The Roman economy, which had operated on standardized currency for 400 years, collapsed into regional barter systems. Trade across the empire broke down. Why ship grain from Egypt to Rome if you can't trust the payment? Why manufacture goods in Gaul if the currency you're paid in will be worthless by the time it reaches you? Provinces started operating independently. Regional strongmen seized control. The central government lost authority because it couldn't pay soldiers, couldn't enforce laws, couldn't maintain infrastructure. The empire didn't fall to barbarian invasion in 280 AD. It fractured internally because the currency collapsed. Stage 7. Complete social and political breakdown. From 235 to 284 AD, Rome had over 50 emperors in 50 years. Most were assassinated or killed in civil wars. This period is called the Crisis of the 3rd Century, and it nearly destroyed Rome permanently. The empire split into 3 competing states. Barbarian tribes invaded and seized territory. Cities were abandoned. Population declined. The most advanced civilization in the Western world collapsed into chaos. And the root cause wasn't military defeat, it was currency debasement. Emperor Diocletian, who seized power in 284, tried to fix it. He issued a new currency. He issued price controls on over 1,000 goods. He restructured the entire economy. And it didn't work. Rome never recovered its former strength. The Western Empire limped along for another 200 years before finally collapsing in 476 AD. But the collapse really started in 194 AD when they debased the denarius. The lesson of Rome? Once you start debasing your currency, the sequence is locked in. Stage 1 leads to Stage 2. Stage 2 leads to 3. And by Stage 5, collapse is inevitable. Now let's jump forward 1,700 years. Weimar Germany, 1914 to 1923. In 1914, Germany was an industrial powerhouse, advanced technology, world-class education. The German mark was backed by gold and trusted internationally. Germany was one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. Then came World War I. Stage 1. Initial crisis requiring funding. Germany went to war in 1914 expecting a quick victory. Instead, they got 4 years of total war. Millions of soldiers, modern artillery, chemical weapons. The costs were staggering, far beyond any previous war in history. Germany spent 170 billion marks on the war. That's roughly $4 trillion in today's money. And they paid for it the same way Rome did. They abandoned the gold standard and started printing money. By 1918, Germany had lost the war. The Kaiser abdicated, and the Treaty of Versailles imposed reparations of 132 billion gold marks, an amount Germany could never realistically pay. The new Weimar government faced a choice: default on reparations, which would mean occupation and possibly the breakup of Germany, or pay them somehow. They chose to pay by printing money. Stage 2. Deliberate reduction of currency value. In 1914, 4.2 marks equaled $1. By 1919, 14 marks equaled $1. By 1921, 75 marks. The government insisted this was temporary, a necessary measure to rebuild the economy. Once Germany recovered, the mark would stabilize. They were lying, or delusional. Either way, the result was the same. Stage 3. Inflation begins as population recognizes debasement. By 1922, Germans noticed something was wrong. Prices were rising every month. A loaf of bread that cost 160 marks in 1922 cost 200 marks a month later. Workers demanded higher wages. Businesses raised prices. The government printed more money to pay its bills. and the cycle accelerated. Stage 4. Acceleration of debasement. In 1922, the German government was printing marks so fast they couldn't keep up with demand for physical currency. They ordered printing presses to run 24 hours a day. They printed on one side only to save time. By mid-1923, the Reichsbank had 30 paper mills, 2,000 printing presses running continuously, and over 100,000 workers doing nothing but printing currency. The exchange rate went insane. In January 1923, 18,000 marks equaled $1. By August, 5 million marks. By October, 25 billion marks. By November, 4.2 trillion marks equaled $1. Let that sink in. In less than a year, the mark lost 99.9999% of its value. Stage 5. Hyperinflation and loss of confidence. By late 1923, Germans were being paid twice a day. They'd get paid at lunch, run to the store immediately, and buy anything they could before prices doubled by evening. Restaurants wouldn't print prices on menus. They'd write them on chalkboards and update hourly. A cup of coffee would cost 5,000 marks when you sat down and 8,000 marks when you finished. People used marks as wallpaper, fuel for fires, because the paper was worth more than the currency printed on it. Life savings were wiped out overnight. A middle-class family that had saved 100,000 marks for retirement saw it become worthless. People who'd worked their entire lives and saved responsibly lost everything. Stage 6. Currency collapse. By November 1923, the mark was completely abandoned. Germans demanded payment in foreign currency, gold, or goods. The official currency of one of the most advanced nations on earth was worthless. The economy was operating on barter. Farmers wouldn't sell food for marks. Manufacturers couldn't buy materials. The entire economic system froze. Stage 7. Social and political breakdown. The hyperinflation destroyed the German middle class. It wiped out savings, pensions, insurance policies, bonds, anything denominated in marks, and the political consequences were catastrophic. The population blamed the Weimar government. They blamed Democrats, socialists, liberals, anyone associated with the system that destroyed their savings. Into that chaos came extremists, communists on the left, Nazis on the right. Both promised to restore order, to punish those responsible, to make Germany strong again. Adolf Hitler attempted his first coup in November 1923, the beer hall putsch. It failed. But the conditions that would eventually bring him to power were created by the hyperinflation. 10 years later, he was chancellor. 6 years after that, World War II. The lesson of Weimar: currency collapse doesn't just destroy the economy, it destroys the social order. It creates conditions for extremism, and the consequences last generations. Now let's look at the most recent example, Zimbabwe, 1980 to 2009. In 1980, Zimbabwe gained independence from Britain. It was called the breadbasket of Africa. Fertile farmland, productive agriculture, mining, manufacturing. The Zimbabwean dollar was worth more than the US dollar. For 20 years, Zimbabwe was relatively stable, not perfect, but functional. Then came Robert Mugabe's land seizures. Stage 1. Initial crisis requiring funding. In 2000, Mugabe's government began seizing white-owned commercial farms and redistributing them to black Zimbabweans. The policy was popular politically, but devastating economically. The new farmers, most of whom lacked commercial farming experience, couldn't maintain production levels. Agricultural output collapsed. Zimbabwe went from exporting food to importing it. At the same time, Mugabe was funding military operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Expensive, unpopular, and completely unaffordable. Tax revenue plummeted. Government spending exploded. And Mugabe did what every failing government does. He printed money. Stage 2. Deliberate reduction of currency value. In 2000, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe started printing currency to cover budget deficits. Not backed by gold, not backed by production, just printing. By 2001, inflation was noticeable, prices rising 50% per year. The government blamed sanctions, blamed Western interference, blamed drought, never blamed the printing presses. Stage 3. Inflation begins. By 2003, inflation hit 600% annually. A population that had trusted the Zimbabwean dollar for 20 years started hoarding foreign currency. Shops began pricing goods in US dollars or South African rand. The government made this illegal. They raided businesses, arrested merchants, and printed more money. Stage 4. Acceleration. From 2005 to 2008, Zimbabwe experienced the second worst hyperinflation in recorded history. Only Weimar Germany was worse. In 2006, inflation was 1,000%. In 2007, 50,000%. By 2008, official inflation was 231 million%, and the real rate was probably higher because the government stopped publishing accurate statistics. The Reserve Bank was printing trillion-dollar notes, not as a figure of speech, actual $100 trillion bills. Stage 5. Hyperinflation and loss of confidence. By 2008, Zimbabweans were abandoning the currency entirely. Shops refused to accept Zimbabwean dollars at any price. Employees demanded payment in foreign currency or goods. The government tried everything. They redenominated the currency 3 times. First, they removed 3 zeros, then 10 zeros, then another 12 zeros. It didn't work, because removing zeros doesn't address the fundamental problem: too much currency chasing too few goods. Stage 6. Currency collapse. In 2009, Zimbabwe officially abandoned the Zimbabwean dollar. The government announced that citizens could use foreign currencies for transactions. The national currency simply ceased to exist. Wiped out. Completely worthless. If you had saved money in Zimbabwean dollars, it was gone. If you had a pension denominated in Zimbabwean dollars, gone. If you had insurance, bonds, anything in the local currency, completely worthless. Stage 7. Economic and social breakdown. Zimbabwe's economy collapsed. Unemployment hit 95%. Millions fled the country. Life expectancy dropped. Infrastructure crumbled. The country became dependent on foreign aid and remittances from citizens working abroad. A nation that had been self-sufficient 30 years earlier was reduced to international charity. Mugabe stayed in power until 2017, but Zimbabwe never recovered. To this day, they use foreign currencies. They've tried launching new domestic currencies, but nobody trusts them. Once you've destroyed a currency completely, trust doesn't come back. 3 examples: Rome, Weimar, Zimbabwe. 3 different eras, 3 different technologies, but the exact same 7-stage sequence. And here's what should keep you awake at night. The United States is following that sequence right now. Let's go through the stages and see where America stands in 2025. Stage 1. Initial crisis requiring funding beyond normal revenues. Check. The United States has been running deficits for decades. We fought wars in Iraq and Afghanistan costing over $8 trillion. We bailed out banks in 2008. We spent $5 trillion on COVID relief in 2020 to 2021. We run trillion-dollar deficits every single year now, even during economic growth. Tax revenue doesn't come close to covering spending, and neither party will cut spending in any meaningful way, so we borrow. And when borrowing isn't enough, we print. Check. Stage 2. Deliberate reduction of currency value. Check. In 1971, Nixon ended dollar convertibility to gold. The dollar became pure fiat currency backed by nothing except government promises. Since 2000, the money supply has increased over 400%. Since 2020, we've printed over $6 trillion. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from $800 billion in 2008 to $9 trillion by 2022. That's not gradual monetary expansion. That's deliberate debasement. We're not mixing copper into silver coins. We're just creating trillions digitally. But the mechanism is identical. Check. Stage 3. Inflation begins as population recognizes debasement. Check. The official inflation rate hit 9% in 2022. Real inflation, measured the way it was calculated in 1980, is closer to 15 to 18%. Housing costs have doubled in 10 years. Food prices are up 30% since 2020. Energy costs spiking. Healthcare unaffordable. Education unaffordable. The population knows something is wrong. Wages aren't keeping up. Savings are losing value. The cost of living is rising faster than income. People are noticing the debasement. Check. Stage 4. Acceleration of debasement as government becomes dependent. Check. The U.S. government is now completely dependent on money printing. Our national debt is $36 trillion. Interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. We cannot pay our obligations with tax revenue. We can't even cover interest payments without running deficits. So what do? Print more, issue more debt, expand the money supply. The Congressional Budget Office projects deficits of $2 trillion per year for the next decade. And that's assuming no recessions, no wars, no crises. When the next crisis hits, we'll print trillions more. Just like Rome kept debasing the denarius, just like Weimar kept printing marks, just like Zimbabwe kept running the presses. We're trapped in the same cycle. We can't stop, because stopping means admitting we're broke. Check. Stage 5. Hyperinflation and loss of public confidence. This is where we are right now. Not full hyperinflation yet, but the early stages of confidence loss. Look at the signs. Central banks globally are reducing dollar reserves at the fastest pace since World War II. They're buying gold at record levels. China, Russia, India, even U.S. allies are diversifying away from the dollar. The petrodollar system, which created artificial demand for dollars for 50 years, just ended. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. Other nations are following. Domestically, trust in the dollar's long-term value is eroding. That's why billionaires are buying farmland. That's why hedge funds are loading up on gold and commodities. That's why corporations are putting cash into Bitcoin and foreign assets. The smart money is quietly moving out of dollar-denominated assets, not in panic, not yet, but methodically, because they see what's coming. We're in stage 5. Early stage 5, but stage 5 nonetheless. And history says, once you're here, stage 6 comes faster than anyone expects. Stage 6. Currency collapse and economic breakdown. We haven't hit this yet, but the mechanics are in motion. Stage 6 is when the global reserve currency status ends, when international trade shifts to other currencies or baskets of currencies, when foreign central banks dump treasury bonds, when the dollars held overseas come flooding back home. That creates massive domestic inflation. Imports become unaffordable. Supply chains break. The economy fragments. We're not there yet, but we're closer than most people realize. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10, maybe less if there's a triggering crisis, a war with China, a debt crisis, a run on treasury bonds, something that breaks confidence completely. And when stage 6 hits, it doesn't unfold over decades. It happens in months. Weimar went from noticeable inflation to complete collapse in less than 2 years. Zimbabwe took about 3 years from crisis to currency abandonment. Modern digital currency can collapse even faster. Stage 7. Complete social and political breakdown. This is the nightmare scenario. When the currency dies, when the economy collapses, when savings are wiped out, social order fractures. We haven't seen this in America since the Civil War, but we've seen it everywhere else. Rome, Weimar, Zimbabwe, and dozens of other examples. When people lose everything, when the system fails them completely, they turn to extremists. They demand someone be punished. They look for strongmen who promise order. The political consequences of currency collapse are always catastrophic. Always. And the United States, with our political divisions, our armed population, our fractured social trust, we're not going to handle it better than Rome or Weimar did. We're going to handle it worse. Let's be clear about the timeline. We're in stage 5 of a 7-stage sequence. Rome took about 100 years to go from stage 5 to 7. They had time. Technology was slow. Communications were slow. Collapse was slow. Weimar took 2 years from stage 5 to total collapse. Zimbabwe took 3 years. How long do we have? Nobody knows exactly, but every indicator suggests it's accelerating. The debt is growing exponentially. The money printing is accelerating. Global dollar demand is falling. Inflation is persistent. And once stage 6 begins, once the global reserve status breaks, the collapse happens fast, not gradually, suddenly. Because currency collapse is mathematical. It's exponential. It starts slow, then explodes. In Weimar, prices were rising monthly in early 1923. By November, they were rising hourly. That's how fast it moves once confidence breaks. The United States has advantages Rome and Weimar didn't. We have technology, we have resources, we have military power, but we also have disadvantages they didn't. We have $36 trillion in debt. We have a completely financialized economy dependent on imports. We have a population with zero experience in real hardship. When this breaks, most Americans won't know what hit them. Because they've been taught that dollars are money, that the government can always pay its bills, that America is different. America isn't different. The pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. Rome thought they were exceptional. Weimar thought they were advanced beyond currency collapse. Zimbabwe thought they were stable. All three followed the pattern to completion. Here's what you should understand about stage 5. This is the stage where you still have options. You can still move assets. You can still prepare. You can still protect yourself. By stage 6, capital controls lock in. By stage 7, it's too late. The wealthy already know this. They're diversifying. Gold, foreign real estate, farmland, hard assets that hold value when currencies die. The middle class is sitting in dollars, in $401,000, in bonds that will be worthless if the dollar collapses. And when stage 6 hits, the people holding paper will learn what Romans in 280 AD learned, what Germans in 1923 learned, what Zimbabweans in 2009 learned. Paper money dies. Always. Every time. Without exception. 3 civilizations, 3 currencies. 3 identical collapses. Rome debased the denarius and the empire fractured. Weimar printed the mark into worthlessness and got Hitler. Zimbabwe destroyed their dollar and became a charity case. The United States is in stage 5 of the same sequence. We've debased the currency. We're dependent on printing. Confidence is eroding, and the pattern says stage 6 and 7 are coming. Maybe we can stop it. Maybe we'll cut spending, balance budgets, restore sound money, rebuild productive capacity. But the pattern says otherwise. History says otherwise. And the math says otherwise. Because once you reach stage 5, the political will to fix the problem never materializes. The pain required to stop debasement is greater than the pain of continuing it. So governments always continue until complete collapse. Rome could have stopped in 200 AD. They didn't. Weimar could have stopped in 1921. They didn't. Zimbabwe could have stopped in 2005. They didn't. And America, with our $36 trillion debt, our trillion-dollar deficits, our complete political dysfunction, we're not going to stop either. We're going to follow the pattern to completion. Stage 6, Stage 7, collapse. The only question is timing, and how many people see it coming versus how many get blindsided. 3 times the pattern played out. 3 times governments thought they were different. 3 times the currency died and took the civilization with it. The answers to what happens next aren't hiding in some uncertain future. They're written in Roman coins debased to worthlessness. They're written in wheelbarrows of German marks. They're written in $100 trillion Zimbabwean bills that couldn't buy bread. The pattern is clear. The stage is set, and we're further along than anyone in power will admit. If this opened your eyes to where we actually are in the sequence, subscribe. Because when Stage 6 begins, when the dollar's reserve status breaks and the real crisis hits, you'll want to understand what's happening and why. The answers aren't hiding in the future. They're written in the past, and I'll show you where to look.